Welcome to the Aaron Harber Show. My guest today is Marshall Summar from Children's National. Marshall, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for inviting us, Aaron. Really appreciate the opportunity here.
Well, you're the Division Chief of Genetics and Metabolism at Children's National. That's very impressive. I want to talk about genetics.
Sure.
How did you get that title?
It's not by missing a meeting. No, I got that title. I've been in genetics and pediatric genetics for about 30 years and was fortunate enough to get the division chief job at Children's National Medical Center in D.C. And so genetics is really kind of two fields. It's genetics, which is all of our heritable information, and then metabolism, which is kind of all the biochemistry stuff. And genetics and biochemistry seemed a little bit much, so we go with genetics and metabolism.
All right, so you must be into mitochondria.
Oh, absolutely.
The works. What are the challenges today in pediatric medicine? What do you see as the biggest challenges?
Well,
that's an easy question.
Yeah, that's an easy question. I can tell you the problems. I'm not so sure I can tell you the answers. Some of them are economic. What we've got is actually a growing number of children on different forms of insurance plans, and at the same time we're having a technology explosion. So things that we couldn't do 20 years ago, genetic sequencing, new forms of surgery, new treatments for diseases we couldn't even treat before. But we also have to figure out how do we actually bring those to the clinic in a way that we can afford. That's one of our biggest challenges, particularly in genetics. That's one that we deal with on a daily basis. Where's the boundary between what we're doing from the research side and what we're doing from the clinical side? Genetic testing is a great example. 15 years ago, it cost you $1 billion to get your human genome sequenced.
Sure, the Human Genome Project.
Right. I was fortunate enough to be a part of that once upon a time.
So you probably know Eric Lander.
I know Eric very well. I
went to school also with Eric, so we're covering a lot of ground.
I think it kind of comes back to there's 10 people in the world and they all know each other kind of thing.
I think that's probably true.
Yeah. But when we did that initially, these were hugely expensive things. Now we can sequence your human genome for really under $1,000. Now it becomes an information problem. So between you and I, there's probably 2.5 million genetic variances between the two of us. And if I'm trying to figure out how a disease of yours comes out of that 2.5 million, I got to go through and peel that back and see. So our biggest cost right now in doing DNA technology is no longer actually the sequence itself. It's all the informatics processing and the interpretation. And then figuring out how do you bring that into a medical model and into patient care is one of the biggest challenges we have.
All right, well, let's talk about that. So okay. You have all that information.
Right.
How do you manage all that information today? I mean, before, as you said, our focus was how do we get the information. Now you have it. It's an overwhelming amount of information. And how do you basically do analysis of that information to see what combinations, what genes, whatever, where the switches are that impact or involve with different diseases? How do you isolate all that?
Well, the first thing I'd tell you is it's very early days in that process. So
I'm disappointed to hear that.
You know what? The way I look at it is it's job security. Right now, there's about 7,000 different rare genetic conditions that we deal with. Those are the ones we know. There are probably just as many that we don't know or don't know what the genetics actually are. So when I started this one many, many years ago, we were certain there's 100,000 genes. Turns out there's only 25,000 genes in humans. We're about as sophisticated as a tomato and a fruit fly, plus a little bit of extra. We've had to go through now and figure out how all of those genes tie to the different diseases. And we're getting better at it. But with the 6 billion bases of DNA each human being has, the millions of variations, it's going to take literally decades to tie all of those sequence variations to what actually manifests as disease. So our biggest gap right now is not actually having the DNA sequence. Generating that, storing that is actually a very straightforward thing. I won't say it's easy, it's straightforward to do. But then taking that and comparing it to the health history, a disease profile a patient has. For the really extreme rare diseases, that's fairly straightforward. Those are often one gene has the effect, and then you have the disease. That's also why they're rare. What we're trying to do now is take all those different variations, think of it as the world's biggest slot machine, and different lineups and different combinations will give you the same payout. And we're trying to figure out what all those combinations are that will give you these different health outcomes. That's it's one of the more complex problems you can actually come up with mathematically. We're not even sure actually that the current computational systems and hardware we have can even start to handle that. So a lot of the new supercomputers that are coming out, they're actually looking at how do you handle these. We use distributed networks. So one kind of interesting thing we're doing trying to process all this data is we'll actually send it out into the cloud. So when we're doing research, we'll actually, people downtime on their PCs, they'll grind away a little bit at some of these things and then try to come back with answers and things like that. So it's a big problem. That's why I think rare disease right now has become so important as a focal point for that.
And is that because it's easier to identify?
It actually is exactly for that reason.
Okay. So if you have that many permutations and combinations, why don't we have the computing? I would think we'd have the computing power to deal with it.
Well, let's say that there's 25,000 genes. Each of those genes has, we'll say on average, 10 to 20,000 letters in it, and 4 possibilities at each of those letters.
Okay, we're way past the billions by now.
We're way past billions by now. So if you take all of the possible permutations in all of those genes, now we've got to throw the other 2 billion genes of what we call regulatory sequence in, which also has an effect. So the problem becomes unmanageable very quickly, and sort of one of those heat death of the universe kind of problems. And what we're trying to do is pull it into bite size, and that's where the rare diseases come, because they are easier to identify. If you can pick them off one gene at a time, and we can say, for instance, sickle cell anemia. Let's just take that as an example. We know the gene. We know what the clinical phenotype looks like. Then we look to see what things happen with sickle cell anemia. Well, pulmonary blood flow problems are one of the issues that come up with that. We then look at the system from the genes we're dealing with. We try to say, okay, how does that play out here? Then we can take that and extrapolate to other systems. Are there similarities between that and common changes in pulmonary blood flow? And then we try to look for genes that look like that, seeing if we can tie them together, moving forward that way. So it's kind of like a puzzle. Right now we're working on the edge pieces. You know,
at best.
At best. Maybe a corner piece. Some days it feels that way.
So when do you think we'll get to the point where we can do these kinds of analyses much faster, much more easily? Is it a 5-year window, would you guess, or what's your guess?
I think a 5 to 10 year window. I'd say 10 years might be a little more realistic. There's a lot of effort now around the precision medicine efforts. There's been a lot of funding from both the government, but also from private industry as well.
We're going to just give us a quick summary of precision medicine today.
So precision medicine is one of those terms that kind of grows out of somebody trying to find what to call something. The best way to say it is, if we look at any disease and we want to look at what the genetic components are in that disease, it allows us to subdivide. So take different types of cancer. Cancer usually arises from genetic variations in genes that control cell growth. The change happens, the cell then takes off and grows wildly after that. But it's different genes and different changes from person to person. So precision medicine is where we're looking at each individual and saying, what's the change that caused that cell to go crazy and grow? So eventually what you have is almost each cancer almost ends up being an individual event.
And so you have to treat it individually.
Right, and you start to group those as much as you can, because it's hard to develop, an individual one-person therapy. But what you learn is you make your therapies more effective by subdividing into smaller groups. That's probably the best description I can come up with it, and then it extends into other fields as well.
Okay, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with Marshall Summar in just a moment.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. I very much would like to hear from you about the program, so please send me an email with your thoughts. You can suggest what topics I should cover, what guests I should invite to be on the show, or even what specific questions you would like me to ask. This is your program. So send your suggestions to Aaron at harbertv.com. I promise to personally read every one, so email me today. And most of all, thanks for watching. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today. Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Because I've never done endorsements or commercials, people ask how are our programs funded, especially because we provide them as a public service to all our broadcast outlets. It's expensive to produce our show, whether we do them here in Denver or go to places such as Aspen, Washington, D.C., or even Iraq. The answer is we depend on contributions to support our work to bring you some of the nation's top opinion leaders. Individuals, businesses, foundations, and other nonprofits make tax-deductible contributions to the Democracy and Media Education Foundation to help allow us to continue to work for you. To find out more or to make a donation, just go to dmefd.org. The DMEF is a tax-exempt public charitable organization and has promised to dedicate 100% of every contribution to support our public affairs initiatives. If you believe, as I do, in the need for a forum which promotes civil discourse and mutually respectful discussion, I hope you'll decide to make a contribution today.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch The Aaron Harber Show and keep hope alive.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. I'm with Marshall Summar. Marshall, we were talking about rare diseases and how actually in certain cases, research-wise, they're easier to target and address than others. What's happening in that field overall, especially when it comes to genetic research and how it's applied to other diseases and areas?
I mean, it's actually been an explosion. So the number of diseases that we can actually genetically diagnose now has gone up by probably 2 orders of magnitude in the last 15 years.
That means 100-fold for
that's
my
right.
viewers.
There you go. I think your viewers are probably very smart.
Yeah, they knew that.
Yeah, they knew that already.
I have some very young viewers. So.
Okay.
Actually, they're smarter than the older ones.
I watch my references then do dated
Well,
things.
pediatric medicine. That's we have 1-year-olds watching the show today.
I would say that the biggest advances have been the identification of rare diseases, but also the longitudinal study of these. And what do I mean by that? So a lot of these very rare conditions that most people have not heard of. I mean, people have heard of Down syndrome, cystic fibrosis, and probably the top 20 most folks have heard of. The other 7,000, there's no reason they would have heard of them. But what those diseases are very sort of extreme and somewhat clinically clean examples of what happens if you take a gene and you mess it up. And so they tell us a lot about the effects of that gene in that gene system. So that's up here. Now we take the environment, which we all live in. Now, if I go stand in front of a truck in the middle of the interstate and I get hit by that truck, it doesn't really matter what my genes are. I'm going to have a medical effect on me no matter what happens. Almost everybody else lives in the middle here. And that middle is the interplay between common genetic variation and the normal environment we all live in. So where are we right now? Well, what we're starting to do, we've got a lot of information on these rare diseases up here. We're using that to kind of inform the middle a little bit and a little bit at the environmental extreme too. And actually the two extremes are the easiest places to work. Where we are for all of us, I'd say, is in the common data collection. In other words, it's going to take hundreds of thousands, millions of people donating both their genetic data and their clinical data so we can start to pull those two things together. A great example of how a rare disease can teach us about a common one is Down syndrome. Everyone knows somebody with Down syndrome by and large. It's an extra copy of the 21st chromosome, and we gauge them by size. So 21 is a very small chromosome. It's about 1 in 700 children born in the United States have Down syndrome. But what we found is that folks with Down syndrome, as they grow up, get a lot of conditions that teach us about other things. So about half the patients in their 20s and 30s with Down syndrome will develop Alzheimer's disease. So very early onset. And there's only a few genes on chromosome 21. Remember, we talked about 25,000 genes in the genome, there's only about 400 genes on chromosome 21. That's a very manageable set. And so what we've done, actually the first genes that were associated with Alzheimer's disease were mapped because we looked on chromosome 21. So by seeing that patients with Down syndrome got Alzheimer's disease, we were able to target a specific small set of genes and find that association, which is already leading to some therapeutic considerations and interventions, things like that. Another good example in Down syndrome is they actually don't tend to get solid tumors. So it's kind of funny. Most folks think, okay, well, there are all these things that happen that aren't good. Actually, folks with Down syndrome don't get solid tumors. Turns out there's an extra copy of the gene because they've got 3 copies of chromosome 21 that acts as a tumor suppressor. And so one of the things we've seen is actually having more of that gene makes you, hugely less likely to develop solid tumors. So from this kind of rare condition, we've learned something about common disease and also maybe some potential treatments too for the rest of us. So the exciting thing for me about rare disease research is we have these kind of very useful things, and it's very important for these patients too. You know, there are a lot of kids out there with Down syndrome. There are a lot of kids with these rare diseases. A kind of good example, so if I give you a survey and you ask you to fill in a blank for an answer for something, and I compile all the answers from hundreds of thousands of people, what's always the most common category? It's other. So rare disease and genetics is the study of other. We study all of the less common things that end up in that large bucket there, but we learn so much from them. And we've used that model to take, not only to treat the patients with rare disease, but to find a way to make them relevant to the rest of the population.
So where are we in terms of using an individual's genetic information to really tailor a treatment that's effective? Are we giving the public the impression that we're much further along in that process than we really are? Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement. I'm going to rat out my field a little bit, and they may pull my union card. But,
good.
Genetics, like a lot of things, tends to get overhyped. In the 90s, we were all doing gene therapy. In the 2000s, the Human Genome Project was going to cure all diseases. Now, precision medicine, it's going to take you from we sequenced your DNA to now you're perfectly healthy. Never that simple. Where I'd say the biggest impact has been in the oncology field and cancer field. So the use of the medications, and if you think about it, the most environmentally extreme medication I can give you is chemotherapy. Those will take you right up to the edge of dying and trying to kill off those cells that you no longer want. So any little subtle variation in how you process those drugs, metabolize them, and their effect can have a huge impact on the patient. And that's where a lot of the common genetic variants are being used to look at how those drugs are being used. So that's kind of I would say, the most advanced field. Right now, would I sequence your DNA and change anything much about your life? No, I wouldn't. Not really anything more than tell you, eat healthy, get plenty of exercise, sleep plenty, and don't get overweight.
All right, I'm 0 for 4.
Yep,
so
there you go.
I'm going to be in trouble. What about in terms of the research that's been done related to heart disease? Give me a quick summary. In fact, I'm going to run through a bunch of diseases or conditions. Give me just a quick 10 or 20 seconds summary of each.
Heart disease, there are some variations, particularly around medicine, that affect clotting that have been important. Those have actually been known for a while. They've been trying to work those in clinically, so that's one there. And then also there's some new genetic risk factors, particularly around calcium deposits, that are coming out of the rare disease field that are going to have an impact there. Not quite mainstream yet.
All right, asthma.
Asthma is a good one.
Thank you.
Yeah, asthma is a great question because we've actually found that we can predict response to asthma treatment drugs in the emergency room based on a few genetic markers. So it turns out the drugs we give hit specific genes and gene targets, and by knowing some variation, we can predict who may or may not respond, and you can get more aggressive with those kids rather than waiting to see if they respond. So that's a good one.
How about pulmonary hypertension?
Oh boy, now you're talking to a disease I work with. So we've actually found there's a common vascular modulator called nitric oxide that we all make. It tells blood vessels to dilate.
This is nitric.
Nitric, yeah, not nitrous. That's a whole different subject, and you got to go there yourself. Nitric oxide will cause blood vessels to dilate. It has a lot of other affects too. As of last night, there's about 126,000 articles on nitric oxide in the scientific literature, which means we don't understand it very well. That's usually an inverse correlation. It turns out we learned something from a rare disease. Kids who can't run the metabolic pathway or biochemical pathway that results in the end of the pathway and the ability to make nitric oxide couldn't make it. And we found we could replace parts of that pathway. Well, it turns out patients who have genetic susceptibilities, let's call them, to pulmonary hypertension, by going back and actually adding those things in, we learned from that rare disease, we can actually make their pulmonary hypertension much better.
All right, my favorite, how about oxidant?
Oxidant injury?
Oxidant injury and, well, I hate to say it, aging.
No, I won't say the two are completely synonymous, but there's definitely a good link there. I'm actually going to go back to my example of Down syndrome. It turns out that on chromosome 21, by having 3 copies, there's an extra copy of a gene called superoxide dismutase. Now, that you shouldn't remember. What you should remember is it makes hydrogen peroxide. And so by having an extra copy, all of the cells are making more hydrogen peroxide than they normally would, which leads to increased oxidant damage in cells. And we think is one of the reasons that Down syndrome causes premature aging. We're using that to look at other conditions around aging as well.
I want to jump to liver disease. Give me a quick summary of where we are.
Liver disease, hemophilia is probably the biggest impact here. We were able to identify the genetic defects that cause the different types, able to make synthetic products to replace those. And so now hemophilia is treated with the human factors because we actually were able to find those genes for that. That's a huge impact there. Chronic liver disease, we're starting to subtype those. So one of the things in precision medicine, cirrhosis or chronic liver damage doesn't always happen given the same factors for different folks. Fatty liver disease, another one where there's a lot going on there. Not quite in the therapeutic part of it yet, but more in the understanding the pathology first.
But getting close.
All
right, we'll be right back to wrap up with Marshall Summar.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. You can follow the show on Twitter for instant notification of new episodes, live event invitations, outtakes, and behind-the-scene photos. And tweet us your topic and guest suggestions today. Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Because I've never done endorsements or commercials, people ask how are our programs funded, especially because we provide them as a public service to all our broadcast outlets. It's expensive to produce our show, whether we do them here in Denver or go to places such as Aspen, Washington, D.C., or even Iraq. The answer is we depend on contributions to support our work to bring you some of the nation's top opinion leaders. Individuals, businesses, foundations, and other nonprofits make tax-deductible contributions to the Democracy and Media Education Foundation to help allow us to continue to work for you. To find out more or to make a donation, just go to dmefd.org. The DMEF is a tax-exempt public charitable organization and has promised to dedicate 100% of every contribution to support our public affairs initiatives. If you believe as I do in the need for a forum which promotes civil discourse and mutually respectful discussion, I hope you'll decide to make a contribution today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Join me and watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harper Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harper Show.
Watch the Aaron Harper Show.
I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harber Show and Keep Hope Alive.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. I'm with Dr. Marshall Summar. We're talking about pediatric diseases and research. And one of the things I'm really interested in is how can we do a better job of screening newborns? And I'm also concerned about the variation based on where you live in terms of the quality of the screening newborns get. How do we even that out? And I don't mean lower that, but raise everybody up.
Let me start off by saying actually newborn screening has been one of the brightest spots in pediatric healthcare. After infectious disease, our ability to screen for a lot of the biochemical and rare diseases has been, in my career, one of the most impactful things I've seen. The other thing is it's getting pretty uniform across the United States. Once upon a time, depending on where you lived, you might or might not get very good newborn screening. We now have national standards for what states are sort of recommended to do. By and large, the states pick those up and do them. In fact, actually, the U.S. military and for the families overseas, they're doing the same thing now as well. So we're getting good standards from there. So what do we screen for? So what does newborn screening mean? The old way we used it, and the way we still kind of use it, is we want to look for conditions that if we recognize them very early and treat them, will have a significant impact on that child's health.
And if you treat them early, that treatment should be a lot easier than
exactly.
You need to treat them 5, 10, 20 years later.
Right. You're preventing damage.
By an order of magnitude in many cases.
Oh, even more so.
Yeah. Multiple orders of magnitude.
PKU classic example. For those of you who don't know it, phenylketonuria is the inability to break down a simple amino acid. Turns out it's a neurotoxin if you can't break it down. About 1 in 15,000 Americans have that. Before newborn screening for this condition, most of the patients already had irreversible brain damage when they were diagnosed. I'm old enough to have taken care of patients who never benefited from that. They're typically living in an institution, can't talk, can't walk, can't care for themselves. After newborn screening, my patients are college graduates, graduate school graduates, professionals in the field. My smartest PKU patient is a golf professional. I think he's got us all beat there. He's figured out the lifestyle thing. So if you look at the impact from that, it's huge for that individual patient, but also huge for society. The dollar for dollar return on newborn screening for PKU is about 7 to 1. Screening for thyroid deficiency in the newborn period is about 50 to 1. Every dollar you spend, you save about $50 in long-term health care costs for those patients. So it's been a huge impact.
All right, last question. As you look around the globe, what's being done in other countries when it comes to pediatric medicine that would be worth our looking at and maybe implementing? And I know you all talk to each other
we do.
This day and age. So
my field, the field of genetics and biochemical genetics, are very, very small fields. We know each other a lot. One of the things is, I won't say there are a lot of things being done elsewhere that aren't being done here, mainly because we work collaboratively. So I work with the scientists in Japan, I work with the scientists in Europe, South America, different parts of the world, and so we tend to do a lot of the same things, and we tend to share our data a lot. When you're small, you have no choice but to be cooperative and collaborative. I'd love to see some regulatory reforms around some of the just process issues, not the safety of what we're doing, not the safety of the treatments, the drugs, the knowledge, but process issues so that we can do things faster and simpler. What part of that has to do with we have very small populations. If you have a rare disease where there are only 10 patients, how do you do a clinical trial for that? And we've worked out ways to do that, but I'd like to see those more widely distributed. I think we're fortunate in the U.S. that we actually do these conditions as well or better than anyone else. So there's not a lot I'd bring here. I feel pretty lucky to be working here.
All right. Marshall, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Aaron.
My pleasure. That was Dr. Marshall Summar. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.